Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoyed this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. His Saturday afternoon was the first time Fiona was in a good mood, and not because it was a day off. She had a lot of those days off in 3 years, and they were all alike. This Saturday, Fiona was leaving the Women's General Population Penitentiary. Before they left, several women who had also served their time with Fiona were summoned to see the warden. When they went into his office, an older, gray-haired man was already waiting for them. On his desk were small gifts for each of the wards who would be released today. "Hello, little dove," the warden greeted them. "Is this the day you have been waiting for? I hope you have learned the bitter lesson you have learned from life, that you do not make the past mistakes, and that you do not make the past mistakes, and that you do not succumb to the temptation to make new one, no matter how much you might want to. And whoever suggested that you break the law, you may never find such a kind boss as I am again." And the man laughed heartily. Around his eyes gathered small, clean wrinkles, which can only be found in good people. "Thank you for your kind words, Evan," Fiona said. "Now I'll think 100 times before I sign any document." As Fiona approached the gate that separated the colony and the public street, she glanced once more at the prison windows. "I won't come back here again," she thought, and stepped into a life of freedom. Fiona was not a murderer or a thief. She was just a loving wife and mother, and she was also very trusting of people. That's what ruined her. Or rather, it was her husband who didn't really care when Fiona was accused of financial crime. Fiona grew up in an intelligent but poor family of teachers. Her father and mother instilled in her kindness and that people should be trusted and helped. After graduating from high school and then from the economics department of the University of Finance, the girl continued to believe in honesty and openness of people. In her course, Fiona was loved not only by the teachers, but also by the students for her kind heart and the help she gave to those who fell behind. Fiona always supported those who were weak and lonely. One such outsider was Dexter, her future husband. Fiona took a liking to him for his quiet disposition and intelligence. However, he already had a girlfriend, a manicurist at a prestigious beauty salon. She earned good money and constantly took Dexter to places he could not afford. Fiona just enjoyed his friendship and did not claim anything. Moreover, she had no money to go to theaters and restaurants. Upon graduation, those students who earned a red diploma and raised prestige were assigned to prestigious companies. Fiona was one of the lucky ones. "Here you are lucky," the classmate said enviously. "You will make a lot of money." "But we didn't get any help at the dean's office." "Well," the girl answered them, "I didn't run around in bars. I studied while you guys were having fun. As they say, to each his due." That's when Dexter made his choice between a manicurist and a leading specialist in a prestigious company. He chose Fiona. The girl was glad. She liked Dexter, and she even thought she was in love with him. The guy himself, barely out of university, got a job as a sales manager in an appliance store. The job brought Fiona not only financial independence, but also a lot of practical experience. Competitors began to entice the young, promising economist to join them, offering better conditions and huge salaries. But she refused. One warm July evening, Dexter and Fiona were sitting on the terrace of a cozy little Italian restaurant. They were enjoying pasta, fruit, and wine. Live music was playing, and the whole atmosphere was inviting to dream. "You know what," Fiona said to Dexter. "I've decided to leave the company." "And who poached you?" "How much are they offering?" Dexter asked curiously. In his heart, he envied Fiona because he could not achieve even a tenth of what she had achieved through her hard work and perseverance. "No, I'm not going to another firm," Fiona smiled. "I want to open my own, where I will manage myself and solve all the issues. I have saved to start and want to borrow some more from the bank. Will you support me? I'm counting on us working together." "Are you out of your mind?" Dexter exclaimed. "How can you give up such a high-paying, prestigious job? How are you going to live? And on what? Come to your senses." Fiona laughed too late. "I've already quit my job and applied everywhere I needed to open my own business. So congratulate me. I'm a young entrepreneur now, and I don't work for my uncle anymore, just myself." Dexter sat there with his mouth open. He was discouraged that his girlfriend had lost her prestigious job and large earnings, and that the future had become murky. Dexter, though a lazy man, remained very calculating. He was raised in a family where every penny was spared, denying himself everything. His parents saved a decent amount of money, which was then eaten up by inflation. This was a big blow to the young man who had hoped for their financial support. Now, he was as naked as a falcon. Now that Fiona was left in such a precarious position, he realized he wouldn't get the financial support from her that he'd had before. In his heart, Dexter was already regretting leaving the one that earnings, which at least were permanent. The ex-girlfriend wasn't exactly star-crossed as Fiona was, and he was much more at ease then. Now Dexter thought Fiona the adventurer was angry with her. Fiona's company, meanwhile, was slowly gaining momentum, and Guy's doubts began to dissipate. And after 6 months, there were already 10 people in her team. From the very beginning, the young businesswoman set up the work so that the company began to give a small but stable income. The lion's share of the profit so far went to employees' salaries and payment of taxes. But the businesswoman did not find out, because she knew perfectly well that she would not stop there and continue to develop her successful enterprise. Dexter, though he was by Fiona's side, was in no hurry to help her. It turned out that it required a lot of effort to earn a penny. Instead of helping his girlfriend, he went on to work in an appliance store. It was a job that suited him. He didn't have to work hard. The money kept coming in. Plus, he didn't have to worry like Fiona did about the whole company. But one day in Fiona's office, he got the call that turned her life upside down. "Hello. The secretary of the International Young Entrepreneurs Association is on the line. Could you put Fiona on the phone, please?" "It's me," Fiona answered. "2 months ago, you applied for the Young Entrepreneur Competition. I would like to congratulate you. You were one of the 3 finalists in the competition and won a grant of $10 million. The entire amount will be transferred to the account you specified, tax deducted." What a pleasant surprise. Fiona exclaimed, "I'd forgotten I ever entered this competition. Thank you." She was so happy she immediately called Dexter and told him about her good luck. That evening they celebrated the company winning the contest and continuing to grow with government support. Now some of the issues that Fiona had long been unable to resolve were themselves surmountable. The young people were sitting on their favorite spot on the terrace of a small Italian restaurant overlooking the picturesque river. It was evening, and the birds were singing. Fiona's mood was upbeat. Suddenly, Dexter held out a small pink box. "Fiona," he said softly, "will you be my wife? You're the man I want to share the rest of my life with. What do you say?" Fiona froze in surprise. She hadn't expected such an outcome. The day had been full of happy events. "I agree," said the girl anxiously. That evening, Dexter and Fiona showed so much dessert, drank so many cocktails that they had never tasted in their entire lives. These gifts were sent to the table at the guests of the restaurants who were lucky enough to witness the birth of a new family. Just 2 months later, Fiona and Dexter were married. The wedding was a modest one. Only relatives and friends were invited. Fiona didn't want pageantry and let them be in the eye, as some brides like to do. All the extra money went to developing the company. Even when Fiona became pregnant, she never let go of the firm's reins. It wasn't until Maria was born that Fiona developed such strong maternal feelings. She thoughtlessly put Dexter in charge of the company, which at the time already employed 150 people. The company itself brought in hundreds of $1 million a year, one day after leaving Maria, a year, one day after leaving Maria, 3-year-old. With a babysitter, Fiona finally visited the office. She noticed that the employees were staring at her strangely. "What's wrong?" Fiona asked her secretary. "Why is everyone so tense?" "Fiona, don't you know we had an inspection 3 days ago?" "What inspection?" Fiona was surprised. All the paperwork was checked by the prosecutor's office and the tax office. They said our company hadn't paid any taxes and that someone might go to jail. Fiona was surprised by this fact and by the fact that Dexter had not told her anything. She went straight to the chief accountant's office. "What's going on?" she asked the employee. "Tell me, there was an audit, and these people said that we weren't paying taxes in full. But I sent the invoices to Dexter for payment. Everything was supposed to be in order. I don't get it." What Fiona did understand was that everything was not all right at all, if the authorities were interested in the company. Dexter said Fiona to her husband, "Why didn't you report that we owed tax payments? Were you playing around with taxes?" "It's no big deal," the man replied. "We'll pay later. And the money I invested in a new business. We're going to sell our appliances. I bought a shipment from China." "You're crazy," said Fiona. "You could go to prison for that. You can't steal from the state. How much do we owe?" When Fiona heard the amount that had accumulated over 2 years, and even with Penny, she was shocked. They couldn't collect that money in the next few months, or they'd have to sell the company. Fiona didn't have time to pay the due amount and went to jail. The young woman fought desperately for her freedom, but not even the best lawyers could help. Debt is debt. But prison was not the real grief that awaited her. One evening she was summoned by the warden of the colony. "Sit down, Fiona," in a quiet voice he said. "You know, I have some news I'd rather not tell you, but you should know it." "What is it?" Fiona asked, in a trembling voice. "He said that he and his daughter were on their way back from a visit to Mariana because there was a heavy downpour and the car skidded. Your husband lost control of the car, and Maria slipped into the river. They pulled him out dead. His body is in the morgue. The girl, on the other hand, has not been found. My sincere condolences. Hold on. You don't have to go to work tomorrow." Fiona was deeply shocked by these words. She got up, walked like a fog to the door, and fainted. She did not wake up until the next day. She had a severe headache from the blow. She couldn't eat or drink and kept crying and remembering her little Maria, who had been left motherless through her husband's fault and was now dead. Everyone said a 3-year-old couldn't swim out of the river. It wasn't realistic. Even the investigators who came to visit said that her daughter was probably dead and the case would be closed. Along with the family, Fiona's soul also died. It was as if she had aged 10 years. Everyone in the cell pitied her because she couldn't even go to her husband's funeral and search for her daughter. It wasn't until 2 years later that the pain of loss slowly dulled, and Fiona worked like a beast to dull her grief. Overachieved by leaps and bounds. So instead of the 4 years she was supposed to serve, she only served 3, and now she was being released on parole. Once outside the gates of the penal colony, Fiona realized she had no place to go. The house had been confiscated, no family. Fiona's parents were no longer alive, but there was the old house where they had lived before. That was where the young woman decided to go. But first she wanted to find her husband's grave. Somehow, after reaching the cemetery, Fiona turned onto a narrow path that led to a small cemetery birch grove. It was the burial place of her husband's family. Beyond the fence dug 3 graves of her father, her mother, and their son, Dexter. So here I am bringing your favorite cottage cheese horns. Fiona put the treat by the monument right on the ground. What have you done? I couldn't leave you unattended at all, and our favorite girl is gone. Fiona noticed that there were flowers growing on Dexter's grave, so someone's taking care of him. That surprised her. After all, he had no one else but his wife, and the family had no contact with distant relatives. Fiona sat on the grave until late in the evening, and when it got dark, the cemetery keeper asked her to leave. "Come back tomorrow." Darkness is not supposed to sit. Do not take the idea of the soul of the deceased. Take no sin on your soul, the grandfather told her, and go home. "Excuse me," said Fiona. "I've been sitting up too long. I'll come back tomorrow." Before she knew it, the sun had gone down. After apologizing again, she went to her parents' old house. The home nest was not greeted with a welcoming terrace and front doors, overgrown with nettles and epics. So to make her way to the doors and find the key hidden under the threshold, she had to pull the weeds. Fiona had no gloves, so she ripped through the nettles with her bare hands. The leaves of the plant burned her hands mercilessly, but she felt no pain as her heart tore with grief. Finally, she entered her home. The home environment calmed Fiona down a bit. It had been a long time since she had taken care of household chores, so she felt good about putting things in order. For a while, she forgot her sadness and immersed herself in the household chores. Fiona went to her husband's grave every day. The caretaker already knew her by sight and greeted her each time as a good acquaintance. So today, Fiona, taking a bouquet of meadow flowers and a bottle of water, went to the cemetery. When she arrived at the grave, she placed an old jug on the pedestal of the monument, filled the vessel with water, and dipped a bouquet of daisies and bells into it. It turned out beautiful and pretty and simple. She sat down on the bench next to the Dexter monument and wondered, how long had she sat like that? Fiona couldn't remember, but a child's whispered voice snapped her out of her sad thoughts, which made Fiona gasp in terror for a lollipop. "Don't wait. You won't wait for him anyway. You'll only fast. You won't hear him anyway. Don't run after him. You won't catch up." "What's that, Gas?" asked a quiet child's voice. It seemed to Fiona that this childish whisper she heard only in her head. The young woman was frightened that she was slowly going mad. And then a wild thought occurred to her. After all, she was in a cemetery. Maybe the spirits were talking to her. But why with the child's voice? This Maria, who also loved riddles. Her daughter was a smart girl and spoke early. By the age of 3, she was already good at distinguishing letters, and so Fiona wanted to take the talented girl to an English school, which accepted from the age of 5. Fiona had many plans for Maria, but they were not destined to come true. She knew the answer to this riddle because she herself had read it to her daughter, and it made her scared. The woman closed her eyes and time resolved. "Time," Fiona answered, in a trembling voice, and turned carefully. For a split second, she allowed herself to dream that behind her stood her young daughter, who should have been 6 by now. Her heart, the woman's, was beating like mad, ready to burst out of her chest. It seemed as if just a little longer and Fiona would faint from the sheer strain. Her nerves were as taut as string, and what was her surprise when Fiona found a boy in front of her. He was an ordinary boy of about 10. He wore nightgown jeans and an old sweater. "Hello," the mysterious boy said to Fiona. "How long have you been sitting here? I saw you yesterday and the day before yesterday, too." "Hello. How long have you been here? And how did you come to be here? You know there's a cemetery here. You gave me quite a scare, didn't you?" Fiona answered and smiled at the child. "I'm sorry," answered the boy. "I just wanted to give you a riddle. You said it correctly. The other people who come here can't guess it. But you could. Yes, I know people are buried here. Aren't you afraid to come here?" Fiona was surprised at his answer. "No. My mother used to tell me to be afraid of the living and the dead. And those who are dead already sleep eternal sleep," as if she were talking about ordinary things. The little philosopher answered, from such an exhaustive and wise answer. Fiona almost opened her mouth in surprise. "What is your name?" she asked. "And why do you walk alone?" "My name is Tony," said the boy. "I often walk here. I take candy from the table and give it to my sister. And then we have tea together." Apparently the boy was pleased that someone was talking to him like an adult, and even got interested in his riddle. This was confirmed by his ear-to-ear smile. "Would you like a chocolate bar?" Tony asked. "It's from home, not from the grave. Did you know you can't take treats from graves? Didn't your mother tell you that?" "No, I hadn't heard that." The smile slid off Tony's face. "My dad doesn't know about it. Mom died 4 years ago. I'm sorry." "Please, why do they let you walk here?" "I go here to see my mom and carry flowers," Tony answered. "Actually, we don't live too far from here. But I have to go. My little sister's home alone. She was the one who taught me the riddle I gave you. Dad will probably be looking for me." "Wait, how old is your sister?" Fiona asked, and her heart raced with a sudden premonition. 5 or 6, I think," the boy concluded impatiently. "Don't you know exactly how old your sister is?" Fiona asked. "No, I don't." "And no one knows," the boy answered. "She's only been with us for 3 years. How 3 years?" Fiona exclaimed, and her breath was taken away with excitement. "It's very simple. Her daddy brought her home and said she was his daughter. Can you show me this girl?" "Begging," she asked. "Of course I can," the boy nodded affirmatively. "Come and visit us. Don't be afraid of anything." "Why should I be afraid?" Fiona asked cautiously. "You'll see," said Tony, and went home inviting her. Fiona got up, said goodbye to her husband, and followed him. Her soul was troubled with vague doubts and even fear. It was all too strange, too incomprehensible, but it was as if someone's unknown hand was pushing her along the path on which Tony was walking briskly. Fiona thought even worse than her present life. Nothing would happen to her anymore, and she trusted. Tony walked and chatted about something of his work, but Fiona did not listen to his words. As if bullets flew past her ears and did not touch her mind, which was next to her beloved daughter Marina. Fiona walked mechanically and was afraid of something. Perhaps that she would find another girl instead of her baby girl, or that Tony would turn out to be a fantasist and there really was no girl. They descended the mountain, and the path led them to a clearing in the woods. Fiona felt uncomfortable. She appeared. The woman did not understand how anyone could have settled in such a wooded wilderness. "What about the school? The kindergarten? How long have you lived here?" Fiona asked. "Always lived cheerfully," answered Tony. "Did your little sister get used to your house straight away?" cautiously asked. "No, not right away. At first she was afraid to live with us and cried a lot. She talked about the rich house and cars and about her father and mother, who were taken away. But she was 3 years old, so we thought she was making it up." "And what's your little sister's name?" with trepidation asked. Angela shortly answered the boy. "That's what she said," asked the poor mother. "No, that's what her daddy called her. That was his grandmother's name." "Did she say what her name was?" Hope grew in Fiona's soul with every other step. At first she thought that Tony and his father and little sister lived in some little cabin in the woods that Fiona had seen before in the movies, and then the so-called cabin showed up. The woman was surprised that the dwelling of this forest family turned out to be a well-cut house with supervised outbuildings, and from afar the bleating of a goat could be heard. Fiona realized that Tony's father kept the whole farm. As they approached the house, a bearded man of huge stature and a frowning look came out to meet them. "Hello," said Fiona politely. "Tony asked me to come over. Would you mind?" She waited for the man to say something, but she was wrong. He kept silent and merely regarded her attentively. Then he made a sign to Tony. The boy nodded. It was as if he had understood him. He said hello. The boy explained cheerfully and ran into the house. It was only then that Fiona realized that the master of the house was mute. "That's the kind of man you meet in a cemetery at night. It's a nice place to sit." And she said out loud, Tony said you found the girl 3 years ago and I lost her. My husband died in an accident, fell off a bridge into the river in Mariana, daughter. They never found mine. I have been remembering my Maria every day since then. Let me come in and see the girl." Frank, his nickname, nodded and pointed to the front door. It didn't take long to convince Fiona. She scurried into the hallway, opened the door, and stepped into the room. The hut itself consisted of 2 rooms. One was small, like a nursery, with 2 cribs, and the other was huge, like a living room, with a dining table flanked by 2 long benches covered with eyelids. In the room stood a large white Russian stove. Next to it was an outhouse where food was cooked, something like a small kitchen. In the children's room next to the wall, the stove with her back to Fiona, sat a little girl. Fiona's heart instantly squeezed. She recognized her daughter's voice, and barely able to stand on her feet with excitement, she raised her voice. "Maria, my daughter, your mother is here." The singing stopped immediately. The girl turned round quickly, and Fiona recognized her as her daughter. The long-suffering mother remembered every feature of her face, every birthmark of her baby girl. The girl glowed. She recognized the mother she had missed and dreamed of every day. "Mommy, you came for me," with a loud cry. Maria threw herself on Fiona's neck. "Darling, my darling," Fiona exclaimed, and she fell silent. She could no longer speak. The tears choked her throat, and she wept until she burst into tears, as only a child can grieve for his mother. During the day, another cry rang out. It was Tony sobbing. He suddenly realized that he too missed his mother very much, and now his little sister was going to be taken away to that rich house she kept telling him about. Fiona reached out to him and beckoned him to look at her. As a boy, he intuitively understood her. He threw himself into her arms, flooding her with tears, and Fiona just sat there in the middle of the room, embracing the 2 children who had long ago become each other's family. Only a few minutes later, she noticed the boy's father standing in the doorway, watching this heartbreaking scene. His mustache was wet with tears, which he was furtively wiping away with the sleeve of his shirt. When Fiona met his eyes, she thanked the man for saving her daughter. It was obvious here the girl was loved. Maria was a clean, pot-bellied and well-groomed little girl. After calming down a bit, Fiona looked around. Half the toys in the room consisted of dolls and bears. The little girl had a little pink closet full to the brim with colorful girly things, whose stuff? Apparently, the new father was not stingy with his adopted daughter. "Baby, I'm not Angela anymore, I'm Maria. I was afraid to tell you my name. I thought you might not like it, and you drove me away." The man waved his hands and shook his head. What did he mean by that? That it was all nonsense. With a gesture, he pointed at himself and then at Maria. That was what Frank was trying to say, that he loved the girl like her own daughter. "Will you take her now?" Tony asked quietly. "Yes, I will," answered Fiona. "Maria and I have a house where my parents lived. Of course, it is not the rich house in which she lived before, but it's livable," and Tony cried. He was sorry to lose the beloved little sister he was so used to. Maria roared too. She ran up to him. "But I don't want to go to another house. I want to live here." Through increasing sobs, Maria said. Fiona looked at the man in bewilderment. She did not know what to do. The landlord, on the other hand, pointed his index finger upward, which meant that Fiona should wait a second. He grabbed a large notepad and a pen and began to write. The words appeared on the sheet. "Stay here as long as you need." "But I can't live here," Fiona answered him. "We can't abuse your hospitality. And I have a job to look for. Besides, you don't know anything about me, but I can stay here for a while so Maria can get used to me again." And Tony wasn't so bitter about leaving. "And I'd also like to know her story. I think you and I are going to have a long conversation." The man nodded and smiled. He was evidently glad of Fiona's decision to stay here for a while longer. When all the excitement had subsided, Fiona could finally look around. The decoration of the house showed the careful hand of its owner. It was clear at once that a friendly and loving family lived here. The first thing she decided to do was to prepare dinner, while Frank worked outside and in the vegetable garden. Fiona, along with her daughter and Tony, busied themselves with the billets. Tony showed her where the eggs, milk, the rest of the produce and vegetables were. To Fiona's surprise, the refrigerator was full to the brim. It was full of all sorts of things. The freezer was full of meat, minced meat, and frozen handmade dumplings. "Do you like pasta?" Fiona asked the children. "What is it?" "We have pasta," answered Tony. "We brush our teeth with it." "No," laughed the woman. "Pasta is an Italian dish made of long pasta." "Then we want that kind of pasta," said little Maria, and grabbed her hand tightly around her mother's skirt. "What happened?" Mom asked. "I'm afraid you'll lose everything again, or I will go somewhere else," whispered the girl. "And I'm also afraid that I'm dreaming." "But how do I know I'm not dreaming?" And so Fiona began to tickle Maria. The girl laughed and calmed down, finally letting go of her mother's skirt. When dinner was ready, Fiona and the children went outside to find Tony's father, but he was nowhere to be found. As they made their way around the apple orchard and vegetable garden looking for the lost Franks, Fiona decided to ask Tony the important thing he had forgotten about with all the excitement. "Listen, Tony, what's your daddy's name?" Fiona asked. "His name is Archie." Shortly the boy answered. "Why can't he talk? Was he born like that?" she went on asking. "No, he became like that the day my mother died," sadly answered Tony. "He just stopped talking. The doctors say it's nervous. They said it would go away, but it never does. It makes him nervous. It's so hard to live. Now he works as a forester, but before he used to take tourists to the mountains and different interesting natural places. Now he doesn't work, even though he used to love it." Fiona realized there was no point in asking the boy any more questions. He was too worried about his father, so she shut up so as not to spoil the child's mood. They found the master of the house in the workshop. The man was writing something in his notebook. Archie said calmly to Fiona, "We haven't really met before, have we?" "My name is Fiona." "What is your name?" "And as you can see, I already know. And we all made dinner together," Maria said. "It's called pasta. Only it's not for the teeth. Don't worry, it's delicious." The man laughed. He laughed at Maria's words. The daughter's words struck a chord. She was shocked that the girl was calling Archie her father, but Fiona decided not to show her surprise to anyone. After all, Maria had lived with the man for 3 whole years. That was the same amount of time she had spent with her own father, who had so carelessly risked their daughter's life. In a way, Fiona was still resentful of Dexter for what had happened to her baby girl. She suddenly wanted, with all her heart, to go to her husband's grave tomorrow and tell him about the miracle that had happened and to scold him a little. Fiona and Maria went to set the table. Archie and his son stayed in the workshop for a while. They needed to gather their tools. When they went into the living room, a magnificent dinner tablecloth was set with the white tablecloth Archie's wife had used before. The table itself was replete with a variety of appetizers, appetizingly written baked goods. And in the center stood a large platter of fragrant, smoky pasta. "How delicious did it all look," Tony exclaimed. "It's been a long time since we had a feast like this." "It has, Dad." He smiled, nodded, and led his son quickly to wash his hands and change to the table. This little nuance did not escape Fiona's gaze, who was pleased that her hard work was noticed and appreciated. While Archie and Tony were away, Fiona spread the pasta dish. She had found candles in 2 old candelabras an hour earlier, which she had cleaned well from the troop's scum. So the festive table was adorned with burning candles, whose flames swung merrily. A few minutes later, the man's hair was on and in a fresh shirt. The man no longer looked like the Frank that Fiona had first seen outside the house. And Tony was not a grimy boy, but a neat and good-looking boy. Externally, father and son bore a great resemblance. So it was amusing to Fiona to see how the little copy of Archie had the same manners as he himself. She smiled involuntarily. Archie noticed this and stretched out in a smile as well. For the first time in 3 years, he felt warm at heart. If a stranger came in here now, he would have thought that the friendly family had gathered to celebrate some holiday or a significant event. Everyone happily began to eat. Maria Tony had trouble picking up the long spaghetti with a fork and putting it into her mouth. Fiona had to teach the children how to eat pasta with a spoon, twist the long pasta and fork. Children had fun repeating the trick. Looking at the kids, Archie also picked up a spoon and began to coil ineptly. He decided to use a spoon and spoon it out every now and then. Fiona was amused by this. She took the pasta straight with her hands and sent it into her mouth. The kids laughed and repeated after her, and Archie did the same. These amusing actions loosened everyone up. The atmosphere was no longer tense. And Fiona got the feeling that she had known Archie and Tony for a long time. "A healthy dinner we made," Maria asked Archie. He nodded and pointed a finger up, which meant super. Fiona flinched again at her daughter calling a stranger daddy. Archie noticed this and patted her on the shoulder. It was his way of showing her not to worry about it. Fiona smiled back, but still worried about how she would be able to tear her daughter away from the man she was deeply attached to. After dinner, the children went to their room to play, and Archie helped Fiona clear the table and wash the dishes. She could never get used to the fact that a man could do the housework. Her husband had never helped with household chores, considering it beyond his dignity. So from time to time she had to use the help of a housekeeper. While she was cleaning, the man was humming a nursery rhyme. She thought Mary was very lucky to be here, to find herself in such kind and reliable hands. When the chores were finished, Archie handed Fiona the notebook from the cave. "What is it?" Fiona asked. The man with a sign indicated for her to read the title page. There was an inscription of his daughter's history there. Fiona was pleased that he considered Maria a family man. The thought made her feel warm and cozy. Archie pointed to her chair, signaling for Fiona to sit down and start reading. She nodded her head to indicate that she understood. She wanted to know more about Mary and the details of her arrival, and so she immersed herself in her notes. The longer Fiona read, the more she became convinced that it was a complicated and secret story. It turned out that Marion had no memory of how she had ended up in the woods, but not my master of the house remembered every detail. 3 years ago, Archie was returning from work through the woods. He was in a big hurry to get home. It was late, and little Tony was staying with a woman he knew who had agreed to look after him while his father was away. After his wife died, family friends helped Archie in any way they could. By that time, he could no longer speak, so he moved carefully. Archie was always afraid that if he got into trouble in the evening, he would not be able to call for help. It was the ability to walk silently. It had served him well that time. And so, as Archie was walking along the path near the river, he saw Mary and 2 silhouettes on the bank, one large, the other small. He wondered, what could these people be doing at this late hour? A small child was heard crying, and an adult male voice was muttering something back to him. Then the man pushed the car straight into the river for some reason. There was a big splash, and the Maria went under the water. Archie, sensing that something was wrong, hid behind the bushes and watched what was happening. He was shocked by what he saw. The man took the small child by the hand and dragged him into the forest. The entire grove was filled with the crying of the baby, who begged not to leave him and said he was scared. At this, the child called the man Daddy. Archie cautiously followed them. When he realized that the man was going to leave his poor child in the woods and leave, he did not follow him, but stayed close by. He was shaken by what he saw. In addition, he was afraid that the man might return and hurt the baby. The child was greatly agitated, crying, sitting on the cold ground. So Archie could wait no longer. We had to save him or he would get hypothermia, so as not to frighten the children. Archie quietly cuckooed to distract the child from Riva. Only then came out. Since the man could not speak, he began mooing a tune from Goodnight. The baby stopped crying and stared at the stranger. Archie stepped closer. He realized it was a girl of about 3. He squatted down and began to show her the figures, the birds and the bunny with his hands. The little girl wiped away her tears and looked at the man attentively. "Are you a forest Santa Claus?" she asked. "You came to save me." Archie could not speak, but just smiled and nodded his head, pointing with his finger where to go. When he held out his hand, the little girl bravely put her little hand in it, either out of shock or fear. But the little girl still could not say her name. She sat down in the farthest corner of the house and sat there until Archie woke up his son and signaled him to talk to his guest. The girl was overjoyed when she saw Tony. We had to arrange a late supper, especially for her. The boy ate sandwiches. She repeated after him. The next day they decided on a name. Archie's grandmother's name was Angela. It was also the name Archie's wife, who had recently died, liked. At one time she really wanted a daughter. But the child was not destined to be born. The girl herself liked the unusual name, and she was proud to wear it. But Archie kept it in her head. The horrible case of the Fuel Maria and the crazy man who had left her own child in the woods. No amount of questioning helped to get the little girl to talk, so Archie gave it up. Now he had 2 children. There was more to worry about. But it was all pleasant worries, and little by little the pain of losing his wife began to wear off. He still could not speak, as if some force held his words in his throat. But the mute man learned to communicate with signs. Little Angela, in whom Archie adored and denied her everything, also understood them. She turned out to be a clever and well-mannered girl, but a big fantasist. He told everyone that she used to live almost in a palace. She had servants, her own little horse on which she rode. She also said that her mother had disappeared and her father had stopped loving her and brought a strange aunt into the house. It was beautiful, very mean. When Daddy couldn't see, she would run. Angela would push her, painfully pull her pigtails and ruin her favorite toys. The little girl was very sorry that her favorite bunny, which her mother had given her, was left in the Mariana. Then, in an outburst of emotion, Archie brought a little white rabbit from the stable and gave it to the little girl. The delight of the girl had no limits. She stopped worrying and, forgetting about everything, hugged the fluffy and cute bunny. Children are children. They only need the love and care of adults to be happy. So ended Archie's long letter about the arrival of the marionette in his home. When Fiona read it, she was in such shock that her hands were shaking. The woman was both angry at her husband and immensely grateful to Archie, who had, in fact, saved her daughter. And Fiona was even more grateful to this frank-looking man for not putting her in an orphanage. Apparently, Dexter had counted on that, thinking that when people found the child, they would send her to an orphanage right away. Fiona could no longer cry. The tears instantly dried from the rage that raged in the woman's chest. Archie came up behind her and put his hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her. He understood her feelings. At last he was able to pour out his heart to someone, even on paper. A secret was weighing on him, and now he could share it with someone. But Archie saw that to relieve his suffering, he had hurt another man. The man knew the truth could be bitter, and so it simply had to be accepted. Fiona turned, met his gaze full of sympathy and understanding. "How could he?" she asked. "I don't understand what could have happened. Who did I go to the grave then? By the way, the woman decided to confess. I want to tell you that I just got out of prison, which I got into because of this very man who left our daughter alone in the woods in the evening. You might say he almost ruined her. Thank you for everything. You took care of Maria like family for 3 years. I owe you the rest of my life." Fiona noticed that Archie was writing something in his notebook. She read it. "You don't owe me anything." but I would like Maria to remain my daughter. Tomorrow we'll figure it out. At least we'll try. You think I went too far with the name Angela?" The young woman read the note and smiled. Even in such a critical situation, went at heart. Archie tried to joke and support her. Fiona realized that a real man was standing in front of her, not the semblance of him that her husband tried to pretend to be. She walked over and rested her head on his shoulder. He stroked her head and patted her back cheerfully with his palm. "Well, time to put the kids to bed, and we're getting to bed ourselves," Fiona said. Archie showed them where there was a spare pillow and blanket, and he went into the yard to close the fence for the night and make sure everything was all right. Half an hour later, the lights were out in the house and the children reported peacefully. There was a silence in the house that was seldom seen in the city, occasionally broken by the soft murmur of trees and the clatter of raindrops on the roof. Fiona was about to fall into a deep and serene sleep for the first time in 3 years. In spite of the trials of life and the horrible things she had to learn about today, she was happy for the first time in a while. She had found her living daughter and a good friend in the person of Archie. Also, Fiona definitely liked Tony, who was that rare type of kid who understood everything as an adult, but was still a kid. Fiona woke up in fine spirits the next morning. The room was flooded with sunshine on a day of cleanliness. The walls and the whole house furnishings exuded a cozy warmth. Fiona found that the children had been up for some time. Their voices could be heard outside. She dressed quickly. She wanted to make a delicious breakfast, but to her surprise she found a jug of milk and sandwiches on the table. It was all neatly covered with a white towel. Could it be for me? Fiona thought. It was the last time her mother had made her breakfast. It made her feel warm. It would seem that there was nothing wrong with making breakfast for someone else, but that was something she missed when she was alone. Fiona felt with all her being that she was no longer alone. There were people close to her who understood her. She gathered breakfast in the house and went out into the yard. There was real fun outside. The children were playing with the little goat that was trying to catch up with them. Archie mooed and waved his hands, letting the kids know not to pick up the goat, and the sly kids pretended not to see his raiding signs. The little ones switched to their mother. "Did you see us playing?" shouted Maria. "That little goat's name is Richie. He's our favorite. Do you know how much fun he is?" Fiona laughed. "I used to carry firewood to the sauna," Tony bragged. "I used to feed the hens. My daughter picked up on that." "You've done well," said Fiona. "And thank you for the breakfast." "Daddy made it," Maria said. Archie stood nearby. "You know," Fiona told him, "I haven't been this calm in a long time. Thank you for caring. I feel like I'm back in my childhood living with my grandmother." "Oh, of course you're not a grandmother." Fiona's words made the man laugh, and he smiled. Archie caught himself thinking that he had been smiling a lot lately, and it was Fiona's fault. He was liking this woman more and more. She was finally able to get a good look at the manor house. Not only was the house clean, but the fence walls were clean as well. The floors were cleanly scrubbed and populated with age, old fabrics of the floor. It also smelled pleasantly of birch brooms and herbs that walked in the shade. Fiona noticed that the owner had homemade dryers not for forest mushrooms and berries. In the barn, there were whole rows of dried fish and large fish hanging. As she was looking at all this goodness, Archie came up to her with a notebook. He wrote that he was in the business of extracting medicinal herbs, berries, and mushrooms, and also digging animal meat to order. Most of the customers are wealthy people who have switched from store, bought food to natural food. So through this trade, the family had enough to live on. In addition, Archie was paid a forester's salary and a disability pension. At the end of the note, Archie asked Fiona to stay and live with them with his daughter, whom he considered his own. She was pleased that he cared about the future and offered to help where she worked and lived. People were ready to rip the last piece out of the other's throat and were waiting for her to make a mistake so they could stab her in the back, and they did. Fiona stayed. The days fled quickly, one by one. Fiona was all about worries. There had to be things to look forward to. Lots of things to look forward to. Lots of things to do again. Helping with winter chores, laundry, cooking, and taking care of the children. To some, it might have seemed that the routine dragged her down and robbed her of her free time. But it didn't. Fiona was happy to be around loved ones and to be needed. She was so used to the children and Archie that she couldn't imagine living without them before. She also caught herself thinking that she was watching Archie more often. Fiona blushed like a girl when he noticed her looking at him. Her heart fluttered and was ready to jump out of her chest. The young woman who had sworn not to let anyone else into her heart was, after all, in love. Only one thought overshadowed how her husband could do such a thing to his daughter. That she herself had fallen prey to his intrigues, been imprisoned, Fiona already understood. But how could he have taken his most precious possession? The negative thoughts were dispelled by Archie, who told her she needed to buy groceries. Fiona agreed. The next day, everyone ate breakfast, got dressed, and loaded up and drove to town. Fiona asked to be dropped off near her parents' house, and then they arranged to meet at the mall an hour later. When Fiona walked into the house, she noticed that some things were out of place. She realized her husband had been here. He was the only one who knew where the house key was. It turns out Dexter was aware that Fiona had returned quickly, packing her papers, phone, and a few things in her backpack. Fiona decided to stop at the store for some children's books. She didn't make it all the way there. On the way, she noticed a familiar car. It was her Mercedes, now driven by her dead husband. The car stopped outside the bank, and an imposing-looking man got out. In him, Fiona recognized Dexter. Hatred boiled up inside her. She wanted to get rid of the bastard once and for all. "Dexter!" she called out. The man didn't turn around, pretending not to hear her. Though Fiona realized he recognized her voice, the man quickened his pace. "Dexter, I'm coming for you," she shouted, "and I'm not backing down." Only then did he turn around. "Austin." That's what the husband hissed. "I changed my name." "Why?" Fiona asked. "It had to be that way," the dead man replied. Fiona noticed that Dexter looked frightened. "Fiona, dear," whispered. "Let's talk, but not here, but somewhere quiet." Fiona realized that someone who didn't officially exist could be expected to do anything. So she turned on geolocation on her phone. So she could track her location on her phone. So she could track her location if necessary. Fiona got in the car. Dexter drove her through some backyards on the outskirts of town. When they arrived at the location, Fiona didn't even know where she was, so she discreetly pressed a button with a special app on her phone. Such a feature. Even before the prison, the company's security service had hooked her up. She knew that the police were going to arrive on the call after a while. "Where is our daughter?" asked Fiona. She didn't want him to know that Maria had been found. "First of all, your daughter," the ex-husband answered. "Secondly, she's not my child." "What do you mean she's not yours?" Fiona was shocked to hear him say that. "Are you out of your mind?" "There is nothing wrong with my head." "Don't worry," Dexter replied coldly. "You know, Fiona, I divorced you while you were in prison, and then I faked my death, changed my name. Now I have another wife. Or rather, not a wife, but a mistress. I'm not a fool to say that twice. And your girl's been in an orphanage for a long time. The woman I live with found proof that Maria is not my daughter. I've seen the papers, okay? It clearly says that I had the mumps when I was 3 years old. That means infertility. Before I died, I bequeathed the whole business to myself under a different name." "You're such a jerk." Fiona screamed. "You would kill your own daughter for money and leave her in the woods. Maria is your daughter, and your mistress just wanted to get rid of the little girl. What kind of fool would betray his own granddaughter?" Maria forgot her name in shock. but I found her." After these words, Fiona was hit hard in the face. Her head felt dizzy. The woman tried to get out of the car, but the doors were blocked. "As you understand, Fiona, I'm going to have to kill you." "You know too much," Dexter hissed. "Both you and your degenerate are going to die." Dexter drew his knife and swung it. The woman mechanically closed her hand and the knife, all into one side or the other of her palm. She screamed and lost consciousness. When Fiona opened her eyes, she saw a white ceiling and walls in front of her. The smell of medicine made it clear that she was in a hospital. "Doctor!" she came to. A man's voice exclaimed. Someone was stroking her hair. "Is that you?" she asked quietly. I said, "Archie, how do you feel?" As if I'd been so ridden. Fiona smiled weakly. "But you surprised me more now. What happened? Why are you talking?" The doctor said the shock had removed my inner barrier, and the dumbness had gone away. "And all thanks to you, or rather to what happened to you. I was very afraid for you. When I got the call that there had been an attempt on your life and you were unconscious in the hospital." "I'm so happy you're talking to me," Fiona cried. "I thought I'd never see you or Maria or Tony again." "Fiona, when I found out I might lose you, I almost died of excitement. Honey, I love you so much. I fell in love as soon as I saw you." Archie's face was full of stingy, manly tears. He clenched and clenched his fists, too, from nervous tension. "It's okay, just part of his face hurts," Fiona said, and stroked his head. "You just don't worry," Archie said. "But I think you're going to get a black eye." And they both laughed. "Well," said the doctor, "you can go home now. You've got stitches in your arm. So come back tomorrow for a dressing." When Fiona recovered, the two lovers filed a registry office. And 2 weeks later, Dexter went to trial. The prosecution asked for 10 years in prison for attempted murder, leaving a minor in danger and shenanigans with Fiona's business. Her reputation as a person and a businesswoman was cleared, and the company was rightfully hers again. As Dexter was led away to his cell after the court verdict, he begged Fiona's forgiveness and lamented that he had been so badly mistaken when he thought Maria was not his daughter. He lamented that he had almost killed his own child, but it was too late. Fiona and Archie's wedding was simple. There was no fanfare and pompous, as is customary for rich people, but a cozy, soulful celebration among Fiona and Archie's loved ones, friends, and co-workers. Maria and Tony were all the more excited about the wedding. They were now truly brother and sister. The children sat proudly next to the bride and groom and wondered why everyone around them was shouting bitter. Settle the company business. Fiona was finally able to take her family on their honeymoon to the sea. There was no end to the guys' joy. They ran along the beach and collected seashells. They watched them in doses and were genuinely surprised that the water in the sea was so salty. "Look, there are dolphins." Fiona and Archie sat on the shore, hugging and happily watching the happy kids play on the beach. "It seems to me that something, or rather, someone is missing." "Who?" she wondered. "I think a third would be useful," said Archie, and pointed at the children. "Already tenderly," Fiona said, and looked at Archie tenderly. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.